Hi everyone, this is Danielle Steadman and I'm the host of Dogman Diaries. I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight, and I'd like to introduce everyone to my very special guest, and he's also the host of Dogman Encounters, Vic Cundiff. Vic, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. And everyone, I also have a special co-host with me tonight. Q, are you there?
I am here. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here tonight, too. Well, everyone, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. But first, Vic, could you just, not that you have to because everybody knows who you are, can you just give all of our listeners a little bit of background information on yourself?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'm Vic Cundiff. I host Dogman Encounters Radio, which premieres on YouTube every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. I also host Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, which premieres every Tuesday evening at 9 p.m. Eastern. I've been a big fan of things that go bump in the night for as long as I can basically remember. I used to also co-host a talk radio show that was Bigfoot specific back in 2007 and 2008 with a now since passed gentleman named Shane McMahon. That show was called Campfire Shadows. That's basically a quick rundown of what I'm all about and what I do.
Well, thank you, Vic. And Q, just so the listeners will know who you are, because you are a fan favorite, could you tell everyone, a little bit about yourself and give a little on your background?
Sure. Well, I consider myself a Sasquatch experiencer. I don't consider myself necessarily a researcher, but I've been honored to be on Mr. Cundiff's Bigfoot show. I've done Sasquatch Chronicles. I've done interviews with Mr. Will Jevning. And I've been on Britton Solon's channel quite a few times.
Yes, those are all great co-hosts too. Or hosts, should I say, not co-hosts, but hosts of their shows. Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right into things. And Vic, the first question I wanted to ask you is one you get all the time, I know, and you're probably tired of answering it. But considering that I am new to all of this, and I tend to get confused myself, especially now that I'm starting to talk to people and they'll ask me questions and sometimes I don't have the answer. Could you begin by telling us what are the different types of dogmen? Because I've heard you say before there's 6. I thought there was just 2.
You're right, I do get asked that question a lot. Well, to correct you a little bit on that, actually Native Americans have said that there are 7 different kinds of dogmen roaming the woods and wild places of North America. For the longest time, I had only heard about 6 different variances of dogmen, but recently I realized that I do know about 7 variances in dogmen. There are 2 main categories in my opinion. One category I call canine type dogmen, and the other main category is what I call type 3. Some people call type 3s type 3 Sasquatch mistakenly because they can look somewhat Sasquatch-like in build, but they're not apes the way that Sasquatch are. They have claws instead of fingernails and toenails the way that an ape would have. So that proves right there that they're not some form of ape the way Sasquatch are. But to get into the variances, canine type dogmen, in my opinion, have 4 variants. One kind of canine type dogman can look as unassuming as a timber wolf that's standing up on its back legs. They normally have arms and paws that kind of droop down in front of them and look somewhat almost useless. There's another kind of canine type dogman that people report seeing that looks like a hyena that can sometimes stand up on its back legs depending on what it's looking to do. An interesting quirk about this kind of canine type dogman is the ones that look kind of hyena-ish, if they do have spots, in almost every case, the spots never appear above its waistline. There are a few instances where eyewitnesses have told me about seeing this kind of dogman with spots all over, but very rarely is that the case. That's why I made that note about the spots almost always being below the waist. There's another variant of canine-type dogmen people tell me about all the time that they describe looking very similar to the werewolf in the Van Helsing movie. And also they talk about dogmen that they've seen that look very similar to the dogmen, or I guess more accurately put, werewolves in the Underworld movies. That's the third variant of canine-type dogmen I hear about. The last variant of canine-type dogmen I want to bring up is what a lot of people call a soldier type. They call this variant a soldier type because it has an unusually large head looking at the size of its body. It's definitely disproportionately large. As far as type 3 dogmen would go, and before I get into the three variants I know of that are reported to me, I'm going to say this. So there are a lot of people out there that have a problem with this kind of cryptid being called a dogman. I don't think for a second that this kind of cryptid falls into the canid family the way I'm convinced canine-type dogmen all do. I just call type 3 dogmen because that's what a lot of people call them. That's what they're known as well. It's what they look like. It's not what they are. That's why I call them that too, the way that a lot of people, like I just said, call them that. Now, having gotten that out of the way, the first variant of this kind of dogman, a type 3, it looks a lot like what you would expect a buff NBA player to look like, except they can have a baboonish or somewhat of a doggish type looking head on top of the body with pointed ears. There's another variant of type 3 that has been described to me as looking a lot like a creature that has hominid-style legs, the way a human would have or a Sasquatch would have, a man-like body build, but it's got a head that looks a lot like the werewolf from the movie An American Werewolf in London. That's the second variant of type 3, and then you've got a third type which looks a lot like the Beast of Seven Shoots. If you haven't seen the photograph that was taken in Canada that is called the Beast of Seven Shoots, Google that and you'll see what I'm talking about. This variant has a body that looks very Sasquatch-like in stature. It's very robust. They can be very big, but instead of having a head like a Sasquatch, they tend to have a muzzle. Some of this kind of type 3, sometimes they're reported with pointed ears. Sometimes they're not reported as being seen with pointed ears. So that just varies. I'm not sure what that's all about, but that's how the reports come in. Those are the 7 different kinds of cryptids that people tell me about all the time that are known as dogmen.
That is a lot to remember, and it's probably going to take me a while to remember it. I promise you that. What I would like to ask you next, though, is which type out of all of those, and like I said, it's a lot, which type is reported the most to you?
Oh, without a doubt, the Van Helsing / Underworld werewolf-looking dogman type of canine type is the most commonly reported one. This kind, I don't know of any instances where it was reported with having a disproportionately large head like the soldier kind seem to have. But yeah, that's definitely what is almost always reported.
When you break up, like, you think of the United States, and you break up the areas, is there, like, have you ever noticed, like, a pattern with these variances? Like, maybe there's a lot of, say, the type 3 Van Helsings in this area, and there might be a lot of the hyena types in another area. Have you ever noticed that?
Well, it's easy to start thinking that they're dispersed that way, but I would need a lot more information before I would jump to that conclusion and go that far. I will tell you, it seems that the hyena type, the hyena variants of a canine type, that seems to be more commonly seen out west in the California area. For example, a really nice lady named Ruth saw one in California, or maybe it was Washington State, but nonetheless, that's where they normally are seen. As far as the Van Helsing kind or the soldier kind would go, they can be seen anywhere for the most part. type 3s, they normally tend to be seen more often down south, but they have been seen and are seen. They continue to be seen up north too. It's just that if I was looking to have an encounter with a type 3, I would definitely head down south, because it would seem your chances of finding one of them is a lot better down there.
The ones we heard reported about in like Wisconsin and, you know, the Bray Road, places like that, what type was that?
Well, see, there are people who swear that the Beast of Bray Road, whenever a dogman like that has been seen, they swear that was actually a type 3 that people were seeing up there. But I know it's a fact that plenty canine type dogmen have been seen in Wisconsin too. They were seen back around that time. That rash of sightings that happened, that spawned all this in Wisconsin, that's what really kicked things off in the 80s. And then things kind of died down in that area and seemed to pick up in Michigan. In the 80s, that seemed to be a big time for Wisconsin sightings. And then in the 90s, Michigan owned the 90s sightings.
Well, what about, I know you talk to people from all over the world. What about the rest of the world? What are they reporting?
Well, for this upcoming Friday show, which is episode 100 of Dogman Encounters, there's a really nice lady, Alexa, who's going to be coming on to talk about the horrifying encounter she had in Germany. But worldwide, I don't really know of any Type 3 sightings that have been reported outside of the U.S. There might be some that have been reported from Canada. So many have come in, and I've spoken with so many people, it's just so hard to remember. And I don't want to mix facts here. But abroad, I've only heard about canine type sightings being reported.
So it is still the canine type that's being reported even abroad.
Oh yeah, and an interesting quirk about this whole canine type 3 thing is you've got this camp of people who think that the only kind of dogman out there are type 3s. Cryptids who have hominid-style leg structure. They don't even believe there's any such thing as a canine-type dogman. How could something like that with canid leg structure exist? What a joke, right? And then you've got this other group of people who think that the only kind of dogman out there are canine types. They don't think there's any such thing as something that can look like a Bigfoot with a canid or a baboon-like head. In fact, I heard this one show, a podcast that Linda Godfrey did, where a cryptid researcher who unfortunately is since passed, Hawk Spearman, he was a really nice man. Hawk Spearman called into that talk radio show when Linda was the guest, and he basically had it out with her, trying to tell her that the only kind of dogmen out there were ones with hominid-style legs, in other words, type 3s. So they went back and forth, and Linda was telling him, no, they have canid-style leg structure. That right there illustrates the fact that you've got those two different camps I was telling you about that don't see eye to eye on what dogmen can look like.
Q, I'm going to let you go ahead and jump in right here because I know you have some questions to go along with what we're talking about, so go ahead.
Okay. Vic, what are some of the more common, what's the most common eye glow colors that are usually reported when it comes to dogman?
Well, in my experience, without a doubt, the most commonly reported color is amber, and then that's followed by a yellowish color of eye glow, and then yellow is followed by reddish-colored eye glow, and then blue is a distant fourth. Occasionally, not very often, but occasionally, you'll have a report come in where someone talks about seeing one with a blue eye glow. In fact, if you listen to the one episode of Dogman Encounters where the Australian young man went out in the middle of the night because it was so hot, he took a glass of water out on the back step and was just sipping it, he saw a dogman with blue eye shine. So, it's not common, but it is reported. There's also a gentleman from Michigan. I forgot his name. I think it's Sanjay. He had an encounter with a dogman, or two. I know one of the dogmen he saw was at his back door, he said, and he told me it had a blue eye shine to it. I can't remember if he saw another dogman that had blue eye shine. I do remember him telling me that he did see another dogman, though. That I know for sure.
Are these particular eye glows attributed to like a certain type of dogman? Because sometimes you hear that sometimes the light source will often affect
No, in my experience, I haven't noticed any pattern of a certain shade or color of eye shine matching a particular kind of dogman. There might be something to that, but I definitely haven't noticed it. I can tell you that there have been multiple cases of canine-type dogmen having red, yellow, amber, all three of those shades. And then as far as the blue eye shine would go, whenever that's been reported, I don't know of any instances where a type 3 has been reported with blue eye shine. So I guess that's the only thing I can say with any kind of certainty to answer your question.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. We always talk about dog men, but how often are dog ladies actually reported in terms of people experiencing female dog men?
Well, very few and far between have reports like that come in. I can tell you that a really good man named Kirk Stokes, who does a lot of work there in Kentucky, he's had what he calls a dog woman. I think he's nicknamed her Lily. Yeah, he interacts with a dog woman, he says, which I believe he's got photographs of her on his website, or actually on his YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend anyone listening check it out. I think it's Kirk Stokes 19. That's the title of his YouTube channel. But Kirk Stokes, he's really the only instance that comes to mind where someone that I can remember off the cuff at least has told me about seeing one. But if you think about it though, for a canine, they're not going to have the pronounced mammary glands that a mammal would have, the way Patty had, the way a human would have, so it wouldn't be as easy to notice that the dogman you're looking at was a female instead of a male.
Okay.
Vic, when we're talking about what the dog men look like, what do you think is the average height and weight of dog men?
Well, as far as an average weight would go, the most common height that's been reported, in my opinion, and understand, you're asking a lot of someone who has a terrifying encounter with something like one of these things. You're asking a lot of them to try and give an accurate estimation of how tall what they saw was, but most people say the dogman they saw was right around 7 feet. Now, there have been instances where ones as tall as 10, 11 feet have been reported. They're few and far between, but they have been reported as being that big. In fact, a great man named Tim Kumbo Baker, who hosts a talk radio show called Bigfoot Outlaw Radio with Bear and Matt Knapp, he investigated a case, I think it was in Oklahoma, where this poor couple saw this dogman looking over the top of their hedges at them. The hedges were, I think, 10 feet tall. When Kumbo went to the other side of those hedges and measured, he noticed that for that dogman to look over the top of the hedges, it would have had to have been touching close to 11 feet in height. So they can get quite a bit bigger than 7 feet, it would appear.
Q, I know you have a question that'll go along kind of with what we're talking about, the height and the weight, about the speed.
Yes, what do you think the top speed is for a dogman?
Well, that's a really good question because it's so rare for people to see them, and there's the cases where they were doing something where they would seemingly be running at their top speed. The cases where something like that's been reported are so few and far between, it's really hard to make an accurate guess on that. But if I had to guess, I wouldn't be surprised if they could top maybe 40, 45 miles an hour, maybe even 50 or above. If you think about it, a quarter horse, it can hit 55. So who's to say a dogman couldn't run that faster, maybe even faster?
In other words, nobody would have a chance.
No way.
Yeah, that makes you feel really good, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like, like I always tell myself, I'm never going back in the woods. I find more and more reasons all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you there. Don't miss the point that you don't have to be faster than the dogman. You just have to be faster than the slowest person in your group, or if they are faster than you are, just make sure you trip them and you'll be fine.
That's kind of mean.
Right.
Well, that's true, but yeah, I guess we're going to have to start exercising a little more, Q.
I know, right?
All right. Vic.
I'm sorry, I was going to say we're going to have to meet some slow people.
Right, and take them out with us. Vic, when it comes to the Dogman, what are the type of, or is there like a type of coat color, or is there colors reported? Like, what are the different types of colors, I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
Well, it runs the gamut. If you've seen a timber wolf with that colored coat, then dogmen have been reported with that same colored coat. A lot of them, most of them are reported as being coal black, blacker than night. But there are plenty of reports, too, that have come in where they've had that timber wolf gray with black hair, fur tips, that look. They've been reported with a dirty brownish look with some black highlights, grayish colors with white streaks mixed in. Any color a timber wolf can come in, people have reported seeing dogmen that same color.
Let me ask you this, Vic. We're talking about the coats and stuff, and I've heard some people say they have hair, and then other people say that it's fur. So, what's reported the most?
Well, from my experience, it's always been a matter of it being reported as being fur. But understand, though, fur is hair. If it's analyzed under a microscope, hair and fur are the same thing. So I guess it's just tomato. But in my experience, I can't remember one eyewitness telling me that what they saw was hair and not fur. That's not to say I want to qualify that comment by saying I've spoken with so many people, I can't say that that's never been reported to me, and I might be forgetting about it right now, but for what comes to mind, I can't recall anyone telling me about seeing something that looked like it had fur, that they thought it had hair instead of fur when they were reporting a dogman encounter to me.
Okay. Q, go ahead.
Okay. Well, in terms of like their disposition and their attitude, commonly, more stories you hear tend to be very aggressive, but are there any accounts to where these creatures are actually not aggressive and maybe just kind of coming off as being territorial? Because, we were talking about Kirk Stokes, and Kirk's a complete gentleman, and the creatures in his area, they seem to tolerate him, so to speak, and they don't seem to be coming after him. I think he has been bluff charged, but they don't seem to be overall very aggressive towards him.
Oh, sure, yeah, there are plenty of instances like that where people report having an encounter where the dogman saw them, it knew they were there, but it didn't come after them. It didn't make any aggressive moves. I definitely wouldn't take that information and make the mistake of thinking that they're necessarily safe to be around, that they're benign in any way. Maybe something was going on where it wasn't interested in being aggressive towards that person that was there that day. The dog man or dog men and dog women that Kirk Stokes runs into, for whatever reason, and I've talked to Kirk quite a bit about this, I agree, for whatever reason, they don't seem to have any interest in harming him or even acting aggressive towards him. If I remember correctly, there might have been one or two instances like that 12-foot dog man he talked about on Brenton Solwin's show. Another great guy, by the way. Can't recommend his YouTube channel enough. But yeah, he is a great guy. But yeah, there was that one instance that Kirk talked about on my show, episode 18, and then on Brenton Solwin's show where he encountered that 12-footer that came out of the woods that one night, sounded like a bulldozer, and had the eyes on the sides of its head instead of the eyes on the front of its head. That one really shook him up, and that one definitely did act aggressive towards him, but the other encounters he's had, I don't believe they were aggressive towards him. So, yeah, there definitely are cases out there where they've been encountered and didn't act all that mean towards the person that saw them.
Do you think that behavior maybe is like attributed, like the aggressive behavior really falls down to like a specific type where you have some creatures that may not be very aggressive, they just kind of want to be left alone, they don't want you in their areas, and then you have some that maybe just have I don't care type policy?
Yeah, that could very well be what's going on. Look at people, though. You've got some people who would give you the shirt off their backs, and you've got people who would kill you at the drop of a hat for doing, you name it. yeah, that could be the same case with them, but when you look at the facts that have come in, it would appear that when you encounter a dogman, chances are it is going to be pretty apoplectic towards you instead of being friendly.
Since we're talking about the dogman and them being aggressive and stuff, do you think that it is possible for someone who has had an encounter, or it be a particularly bad encounter, do you think it's possible for them to harm or kill the dogman?
Well, it's been reported that people have killed them. You've got the guest from, I believe it was episode 66, who came on and talked about his uncles who were able to kill one, he said, with shotguns. I wasn't there to witness it, so I don't know that that definitely happened. There are other instances where they've been reportedly killed with spears. There's a really nice man named Jonathan Barber who lives up in Canada who talked about, I believe there was a case where his grandmother, his then girlfriend's grandmother, who was from Morocco, I believe, when she was a little girl, if I remember correctly, she witnessed a bunch of men in her village kill a dog man with spears. I've never seen this happen, so I don't know as a fact that that is what happened in these cases, but I have heard of them being killed, so maybe there is something to it. If it breathes, you would think it could be killed, so I can't see why that wouldn't be the case.
What are your thoughts about the dogmen being so intimidating? Why do you think that they bang on homes and watch people, but there's rarely any, they'll do this and they do the intimidating stuff, but then a lot of times they don't attack or they let the people, just walk away. Even in my case, as much as I thought the dogman was definitely going to bust through the window, he didn't.
Well, that's a really good question. That's one I don't have the answer to. I can say that it goes without saying that they're the masters of intimidation. For whatever reason, it would seem that they'll go miles out of their way to intimidate someone, to scare them within an inch of their life. Why they do that, I really don't know. I've heard a lot of theories out there trying to explain why they do that, but we really don't know. Just like a lot of other things about them, that's one of the things that we just don't have an answer for.
What do you think is the most aggressive type of dogman?
Well, without a doubt, it would seem the soldier type. The soldier type variants of the canine type, that definitely seems to be the one, if you encounter it, seems to be the one that's going to be most likely to be really nasty towards you. That's the one with a disproportionately large head, by the way. I don't know why that is, but that definitely seems to be the case.
Vic, do you know if anyone has ever been killed by a dogman?
Well, I've heard it put out there that someone heard that this person was killed by a dogman, but I wasn't there to know that that's really what happened. Jonathan Barber, who I just mentioned a bit ago up in Canada, he talked about a man, I believe in Australia, who was going out to try and bag a dogman. He mentioned how the man was found decapitated out in the bush. That, I don't know if that's a true story. Jonathan doesn't know if that's a true story or not, but that is a case of a story that's floating around out there where someone apparently did get killed by a dogman. Again, I don't know that it's true. I'm just saying that that story is out there. We've also got the story from the LBL. There's a story floating around about that area, right on the border of Kentucky and Tennessee, about that poor family in the mobile home who was supposedly found butchered. Of course, their daughter was found some distance away, dismembered up in a tree. I don't know that that's a true story or not, but that is yet another story floating around about an instance where it would seem a dogman killed people.
Yes, now that is if that story is true, that is probably one of the most horrible stories that I have heard about the dogman. Q, would you like to ask something?
Sure. In terms of how smart these dogmen are, do you think maybe their intelligence is similar to that of primitive humans in the way they seem to have some really adept, problem-solving skills? Like, for example, the story of Taylor, Mississippi, the dogmen, when they were surrounding the home, they seemed to be looking for, the weakest part of the house to actually get in.
Yeah, that's another really good question. Yeah, looking at the things that they reportedly do, I'll bet you're right on the money as far as their intelligence level being up there with early hominids, with early humans. If the things that they're reported as doing are true, then I would say that would have to be the case. For them to manipulate latches and doorknobs and door handles on cars the way they do, and do some of the other things that would require a lot of intelligence, I would say, yeah, they must be that smart. There are some people who mistakenly think that maybe they just have typical animal intelligence because they look dog-like. I wouldn't make that mistake. I think that'd be a bad mistake to make.
Well, really to underestimate any kind of animal, and not just necessarily a cryptid, but, especially these dogmen, I think they're much smarter than people think that they are. Because there's certain instances where they seem to really assess a situation before they really move in, and you can tell that they're really thinking about what they're doing before they're doing it. Like, whereas a wild animal might act upon instinct and might just lash out at a person, they really think about what they do before they do it.
Oh, no doubt about that. You mentioned Darkwater is another really good man. I love his show. That story, The Siege of Lockett Ranch, if half of what was shared on that story is true, yeah, that right there would point towards an intelligence that's way above what any of us would find comfortable. If they were half that smart, that would be a really bad thing.
A question a lot of people are wondering about, including myself, is like in terms of their relationships with Sasquatch. How do you think the two actually get along? Because people do report actually seeing both Dogman and Sasquatch in the same groups. Do you think maybe they get along? Maybe that they split territory sometimes, or they maybe fight and not get along very well? But there are some cases where people think the Dogmen are actually pets to the Sasquatch.
That's another really good question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I can tell you I've had people who I trust. Bear, for example, from Bigfoot Outlaw Radio, he's told me about seeing photos that he's convinced are genuine, where there was a Sasquatch and then there was a Dogman in the same photo standing almost side by side looking at the person taking the camera, taking the picture. You've got instances like that, but then also you've got people I know of who I definitely trust who talked about having a situation where maybe Sasquatch lived close to one part of their property, and on their huge property there was an area where the Dogmen seemed to live, and they had, say, a creek or a stream between their territories where one never would go into the other's territory, or sometimes the Dogmen would cross that creek and venture into the Sasquatch's territory, apparently trying to pick off a Sasquatch for food or something. So you've got some cases over here from people who I trust that make it seem like they mix like oil and water. And then you've got other instances from people over here who I also trust where it would seem like in some cases they can get along and coexist. So I'm not really sure what to think about that.
You were talking about what you just said about some people have reported, seeing them both in the same picture. I know you just had a guest on Bobby on your episode 99, and a lot of people are saying they think that is a soldier and a Sasquatch in his picture. What do you think of that picture?
Well, I didn't know people were saying that, but I'm so busy I don't have time to just check out.
Well, they are.
Anymore. All I do is work anymore. That's not right. Okay, I feel better now that I've had my moment. Anyway, yeah, that could be what was going on there. I don't know for sure. To have the subject on the left side of that cave, I don't know for sure that it was the Dogman. I don't like to jump to conclusions unless I can see for sure that something I'm looking at is definitely a Dogman, or if it's definitely a Sasquatch. I don't want to make that jump and try to claim that I know with 100% certainty what's going on there. But looking at that photograph, it looks to me like that very well could be a Dogman. And it looks like it very well could be a soldier-type Dogman. And then what you just mentioned about the subject on the right side of the cave, the black subject, it looks to me like it is a Sasquatch, a black Sasquatch with its back to the camera. I can't see it clear enough. Again, I can't see it clear enough to know with 100% certainty that that's what that is on the right, that it's definitely a Sasquatch, but I can tell you that it looks like that's what it is to me also. So if that's the case, then yeah, that's another example of dogmen and Sasquatch having some kind of a coexistence.
I hate to jump backwards, but I am going to jump backwards just for a minute because I really wanted to ask you this. Do you think that all dogmen are dangerous or just certain types?
Well, yeah, I think any dogman can be dangerous, just like really any dog could be dangerous. Any dog can bite, any cat can bite. When you're talking about a dogman, the potential to do danger is so much more of a concern because of their size, their strength, and their weaponry. That just makes it that much better of an idea to be cautious of them. But yeah, I do think any and all dogmen should be given a lot of respect, and I think you should show a lot of caution when you're in the presence of one.
Do you ever get reports where perhaps the dogman was nice or did something good?
I do, and there's one story that comes to mind. It just came to mind instantly that I'd love to share with you. I can't remember for sure if this eyewitness told me not to share that story with anyone. With that in mind, I'm not going to put it out there, but if I knew that I had a green light to share it, I definitely would. I will say, since I can't share that with you, all I can do is just tell you that, yes, I have had stories shared with me where dogmen, they didn't necessarily show an altruistic nature, but they did seemingly act in a way that was not menacing at all. They were almost affable.
Wow, now that is interesting, and I have to admit that I had two, now that I'm doing this, I have now had one story where someone thought they were saved by a dogman, and I had another lady call me, and she works, I can't say where, but she works, and it's kind of outdoors, and it's like the lines are drawn. She knows they're there, she sees them, but they don't bother her. I don't know if you would call that good, but they stay on their side, she stays on her side. There's no problems, so you know, I don't even know what to say to cases like that. And I'm sure you don't either, do you, Vic?
Not really. You're at such a loss as far as information would go. It's hard to really know what to think of cases like that. All you can do is, as you know, just listen to what is shared with you and make up your own mind, whether you believe it or not, and if you do believe it, what you think the real case of what's going on is.
I wanted to ask you about packs. These dogmen are now being reported that they are running in packs. What do you think, or what is your take on this whole pack situation?
You guys are full of great questions. I love it. Well, as far as you are, too, as far as that would go, I'm asked about that all the time. It's my opinion that, well, of course, if you think about wolves, they run in packs because in a lot of cases, the game that they take down, it requires numbers of wolves to successfully take that prey animal down. If you're talking about an elk, if you're talking about a bison, it's going to take more than one wolf to take something like that down, unless you're talking about a juvenile. With dogmen, I don't know of any instances where their prey is going to require more than one of them to take it down. There have been plenty of cases reported where people saw a dogman take down something as large as a Brahma bull. So in their instance, there's no requirement for them to run around in groups. It would appear that they still do run around in groups from time to time. Maybe they're doing that not necessarily with predation on their minds. Maybe it's just a social thing. They are canids after all, but that's another case where I just don't have the answer for it. All I can do is guess.
Well, that's another question I did want to ask you since you brought up wolves. Since we call them dogmen and they tend to look like wolves, do you think that within their society that it is structured just like a real wolf pack?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case because of some of the information that's been shared by eyewitnesses who ran into groups of them. When you hear them talk about how it would definitely appear that that group that they encountered had an alpha who was clearly in charge, it would appear that they do have a social structure like that, the same kind of social structure that wolf packs have. So that probably is the case.
And since you sort of brought it up a moment ago, when we're talking about the Dogman, do you believe that the Dogman are natural or supernatural? Or both, or what?
Well, I'd like to think that they are flesh and blood, but that's one of the frustrating things, again, about them. As soon as you start to think you have an answer about something with regards to them, something comes up that reminds you that you just don't have a clue of what's really going on with them. When you hear stories of people seeing them eating roadkill and drinking water out of a stream and doing this or that you'd expect a flesh and blood creature to do and to have to do, before you know it, you've got another instance that comes around where they're doing something that points towards them not being flesh and blood. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. That's a good question.
What do you think about some of these reports where people actually report seeing dogmen wear clothes?
Well, I'm not really sure what to think of that. Those reports come in so few and far between. I'm not sure what to think about that. I've heard about cases where people saw dogmen with clothes on, but the reports of that happening are so few and far between, I'm really not sure what to make of it. I just don't have enough info on that to form an opinion.
Okay, and that kind of brings me to the next question. Do people have other paranormal type experiences in like some of the same locations that they see dogmen, such as maybe UFOs and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that does happen a lot. In a lot of instances where people have reported seeing orbs of light floating around out in the woods. That happened, and then before too long, a dogman was seen, or dogmen were seen. If you remember that instance from Maine, where Shelley Rockwell Martin, who was featured on that episode of Paranormal Witness titled Wolfpack, she talked about the lights that she and her husband saw come down into the woods and I think settle on the ground. If I remember correctly, they weren't necessarily orbs of light. They were much bigger than what most orbs are reported as being, but she saw those lights come down to the ground, and then before too long, she and her husband had that dogman encounter, the encounter with those 5 dogmen. Yeah, there are a lot of cases like that where people see orbs of light or some other paranormal activity happens, and then before too long, the dogmen appear. So, in a lot of instances, it would appear that they're connected.
Which would kind of bring you to this. Like, a lot of people talk about the Gable film, and you have a lot of people who really have their own opinions about it. But in your personal opinion, do you think that maybe that was a real creature? Do you think it was something that was just made to be a homemade movie? Or do you think it was possibly a creature that's actually being covered up?
Oh no, I'm convinced that was just a hoax. The story behind the Gable film, for anyone who doesn't know about it, in 2007, this film appeared on the internet titled The Gable Film. And in this film, it shows this creature that looks to be about maybe 100 feet or so away from this camera that's being held pointed at it. Well, after a few moments, this creature seems to take notice of the cameraman or camera woman and starts running towards the camera. You can see it charging right at the camera. Well, it's running in a quadrupedal form that makes it look like it can't be a human. The movement's way too fluid and natural looking to be a human, at least in my mind. That's the impression I got when I first saw it. So I was inclined to believe it was genuine. Well, over the years, after some time, a man named Micah Gruza came forward and said that he was behind that film. He had faked that film. He said that was actually him in a ghillie suit that was doctored to make it look not like a ghillie suit, and he was charging the camera that way. Well, a lot of people, they didn't buy that, so Mike wound up setting it up so reporters, including Linda Godfrey, he set it up so that this group of reporters would show up at his property and he was going to put on this demonstration to prove that it was in fact him in that ghillie suit costume. Well, as what I heard, if I remember correctly, Linda Godfrey say, when they were standing in the exact same spot where that camera man had been standing when this was filmed, Mike went up to the spot where the dog man, the alleged dog man, had been when you first saw it in that film. He got down on all fours, and is, like I said, if I remember, I think it was Linda Godfrey who said this. If I remember correctly, she said that he started running at the camera on all fours in the exact same manner that the subject in that Gable film did. She said that it was so convincing the way he ran on all fours that as he got near them, he ran right at them. As he got near them, she said that they all reeled because it was so creepy to see. So, having heard that, I'm convinced it was just a hoax and there was nothing genuine about it.
As we were talking about that, it kind of, I guess it does kind of lead to this question. Do you believe humans can turn into werewolves?
I don't. No, I don't. Anything's possible. I'll be the first person to say that anything is possible. If you can have subatomic particles wink in and wink out of existence. Quantum physics has proven that. I think they're called quarks. But if you can have subatomic particles wink into existence and wink out of existence like that, which has been proven, then I guess it's possible that a human could somehow transform into a monstrous form like that, but that's definitely something I would have to see to believe. I'm not going to sit here and say that I definitely believe it because, like I said, I'd have to see that to believe that that's real.
Right. I think I would be like you, Vic. That's something I would have to see with my own eyes to believe. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I would definitely have to see that. Do you think that dogmen are possibly a species of their own?
You lost me on that question when you say a species of their own. What do you mean by that?
Okay, some people believe that, they're part of the canid family. Some people believe they're a type of Sasquatch. Could they just be neither and just be a species of their own? Something that none of us know.
Well, yeah, that could be. But understand that bears, for example, they're distantly related to pigs, but they're not pigs. They've evolved to the point where they look the way they do, they act the way they do. They are totally different in appearance than pigs, but at one time, they were pigs. In my opinion, when people ask me, what's going on with dogmen? Why do they look the way they do? How can they look the way they do? I think at one time, canine-type dogmen were just a typical quadrupedal form of dog who happened to evolve to look and behave the way that they currently do. As far as type 3, quote-unquote, dogmen, I don't believe for a second that they're canine in any way. Again, like I said at the start of the interview, a lot of people, including me, call them dogmen because of what they look like, not what they are. But type 3 dogmen, I've got no idea what they're all about. I guess you could say that maybe they were genetically related to Sasquatch at one time and they evolved away from that. They evolved away from having fingernails and toenails. They evolved to the point where they have claws on their fingertips and on their toes, the tips of their toes. Understand that it would appear type 3 dogmen are obligate carnivores. In other words, all they eat is meat. That is easily proven when you look at their tooth structure. If a creature is an obligate carnivore, not only are they going to have canines that are adapted for processing meat, they're also going to have carnassial teeth, which are the molars that are adapted for processing meat. Sasquatch, it would definitely appear that they do not have carnassials, molars, that are adapted for processing meat. They apparently have carnassials that are adapted for processing vegetation, for plant matter, vegetables, fruits, things like that. They do have canines that are adapted for processing meat, but that's because it would appear, every indication is that they're omnivores, not obligate carnivores, the way it would appear that type 3s are. I'm saying this to show there are enough differences between type 3 dogmen and Sasquatch to point towards the fact that type 3s are not Sasquatch. They might have been Sasquatch at some distant time in the past, but now they're not Sasquatch. At least their physical adaptations point towards that being a fact.
Well, considering we're talking about this actually, it just sprang into my mind, and I have to ask, I'm sorry. There's a lot of people that I've talked to, and I'm sure you have too, and I don't want to get into the government or controversies, but do you believe that any of these things could be bioengineered?
Well, I think some could, but I don't believe that's where they came from. When you look at the fact that you had them being reported as far back as 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan, the government didn't have the means to genetically engineer something like that back then. The reports, they go way back. They go back much further than that. They go back into antiquity. Look at all the hieroglyphics on pyramids of Anubis. They've been reported for so long, there's no way the government could have been the genesis of dogmen. They could have created creatures, I would suppose, that look like dogmen, but I don't think that's where this whole dogman thing came from.
Do you think that perhaps maybe the soldier, the ones that, look like the soldier dogman, could possibly be bioengineered?
It's possible. Yeah, that could very easily be. Maybe one of the variants is a genetic experiment, and all the rest, they've been with us the whole time. I don't know, but that is possible.
I guess for me, I would just think if something was bioengineered, I don't even know if it could reproduce. That's so hard for me to wrap my mind around. I'm not sure it could reproduce in the wild. Q, is there anything you want to say about this? Because now I've kind of led us down a rabbit hole I didn't mean to.
Well, interestingly enough, I do believe that it would be possible to some degree if somebody had an in-depth understanding of how DNA works. I think if you were going to make some kind of a hybrid creature, you would have to have the correct genetic code. And sometimes you could take, DNA of two different things, but you would have to have something that's related to those type things. Like in the way human beings, we have DNA from plants and that sort of thing that kind of hold our DNA together. But I think if somebody maybe understood how genetics work and they understood DNA codes, it could be very well possible. It wouldn't be an impossibility in my mind. People report hearing bones popping, as Miss Cat Hansen did when she had her experience. And what is your theory and your take on the bone popping that sometimes people report? And do you think this is maybe attributed to a certain type of dogman?
Well, I don't know that it's attributed to a certain type of dogman necessarily, but I will say that not long after episode 12 of Dogman Encounters premiered, a surgeon who listens to the show contacted me, and he gave me the rundown on why it would make perfect sense for a creature that went around on all fours most of the time, if it was to stand up on two legs the way that she talked about, the one that she saw, how it did. He explained to me how it makes perfect sense that its hips would pop the way she talked about hearing them pop in that show. It was way above my pay grade, the terms he was sharing with me and the reasons he was giving for why that's expected, but he did say that that is what you would expect. Yeah, I don't know. That's well above my pay grade to come to any conclusions on whether that does make sense or not. I'm not sure what to think about that.
Okay, do you maybe think Sasquatch, that maybe they can speak and actually have some form of a language?
Well, I guess that's possible, but unlike Sasquatch, it wouldn't appear that they have the physical adaptations that would promote being able to speak a language the way humans can and do. And if your mouth if your tongue isn't positioned correctly, you can't verbalize sounds that would be required to communicate the way that we do with our languages. That's one of the reasons why gorillas, because of their head positioning and their tongues, that's one of the reasons why they can't speak the way that we do. Maybe they do have some other way of communicating that we just don't know about. You look at dogs, you look at wolves, they have their own language. It's not nearly as complicated as ours, but it is a form of language. They use body language. They use posture to communicate. Maybe dogmen, because of their intelligence, maybe they can communicate on a level far and above what typical canines that we know of can communicate. That's just one of those things where I just don't have nearly enough information to come to any conclusions on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your answers.
Sure.
Vic, I wanted to ask you about the hands. People, I'm realizing, actually report, some people say hands, some people say paws. What do you think, or what is reported the most, should I say?
Oh, without a doubt, people almost always report seeing the hands, which look like stretched out paws, paws that have digits that are stretched out to look more like raccoon paws. Some are reported as just looking like massive hands, but most are reported as looking like big raccoon paws. For type 3s, they're reported as looking like massive hands with claws on the tips of their fingers.
What do you think a person should do if they encounter a dogman?
Wow, that's a really hard one to answer because there are so many different things you could be doing when you encounter one. There are so many variables, I'm not really sure what to say on that. Are you in a group? Are you alone? Are you in the woods? Or are you someplace in the suburbs? Yes, they do come into suburbs and get seen. It's not a comfortable thought, but yeah, there are definitely cases that have been reported like that. I'm not sure what to recommend other than treating it just like you would treat some big predator. Don't do anything to make it think you're challenging its dominance. Don't do anything that would entice it to chase you. That's about all I could recommend that you do.
Well, we've heard on your show it doesn't seem that guns especially seem to harm these animals, very often. What about other things? I've had people ask me about bear mace or loud air horns. Is there anything like that you could recommend?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend the air horn over bear mace or anything else that's going to actually hurt it. If you do something like that, if you spray something like bear mace on one of these things, get that bear mace in its eyes or whatnot and actually hurt it, if it doesn't get the job done, that's going to do nothing but make the chances of you getting killed that much more likely, that much higher. So that's why I recommend something like an air horn. And that's not my idea. That was actually an idea that a man named David Kyleman told me about. So I like that idea a lot because it's irritating to the dog man's sensitive ears. It's likely to drive it away. But when you do honk an air horn at it, you're not actually injuring it or causing it the kind of pain that you would be causing it if you sprayed bear mace in its face. You're doing something that is probably going to drive it away, but if you don't drive it away, you're not necessarily increasing the chances that it's going to be coming at you with vengeance on its mind, the way it would if you tried shooting it with a gun or spraying that bear mace in its face.
When you hear of people wanting to go out and look for these creatures, what do you think about that?
Well, I definitely think that's crazy to do. If you've heard all the stories that I've heard, it's just so hard to imagine that anyone would intentionally put themselves in the presence of one of these things or a group of these things. The most unnerving stories that have been shared with me, they're so disturbing that the people who lived through it, unfortunately, who had to go through the experience, they're way too shook up to ever want to relive it again by coming on the show, for example, and sharing with the audience what happened to them. And for good reason. I can fully understand them not wanting to do that. Having said that, what I'm getting at here is there have been a lot of shows where people talked about, that show was just so over the top, scary. Episode 83, your show. Episode 66, episode 12 with Kat Hansen. Yeah, those are very unnerving encounters, but by far the ones that are the most terrifying, they're the ones that I can't put out there, that you won't hear the eyewitnesses come on and talk about. It gets a lot worse than that.
Yes, I agree with you completely, and you've given everyone some great advice as far as how to deter one if they were to meet one, and letting everybody know. And I want to say this again, please do not go out looking for these creatures. They are dangerous, in my opinion. They just want to be left alone. If you are unfortunate enough to encounter one, perhaps some of the things you've heard here tonight that Vic has said you will remember. Not that you might have an air horn on you, but always treat it, I tell people to treat it like they would a bear. Slowly back out of the area, try not to look at it too much, just try to back out, get away, and hopefully you'll be like some of us, me in particular, you'll get out of it without getting harmed. I would like to ask you, which episodes of your own show are your favorites? Can you give me 5?
My favorite episodes. Well, I don't look at them that way. I don't look at those episodes and say that, okay, this one is necessarily better than the other one. They're all very interesting to me. And that's one of the things that frustrates me. I feel bad when an eyewitness shares their encounter with me and they say, you know what? I'd like to be on your show, but I don't think it's worthy of being on your show. I hate when I hear that. I feel bad when an eyewitness tells me that. All the encounters where the eyewitness is interested in coming on and sharing the details of what unfortunately happened to them, all of them are definitely worthy for coming on the show. The show is not for entertainment purposes. The purpose of the show is to help these eyewitnesses grow through the process of putting what happened to them out there in a public venue. So it doesn't matter. Having said that, of course it doesn't matter if this person's encounter is a true nail biter compared to other encounters that have been shared on the show. Having said all that, it's hard for me to pick ones that I look at as being favorites. I can tell you, though, if I had to point out ones that I think are the most unnerving ones that I've aired, if that's the case, I would have to say definitely episode 12 would be in that group. Episode 83, which of course you did, Danielle, that would definitely be in the group. Episode 66, episode 67, and then also, I forgot the episode number, but it's the episode where the gentleman got scratched by the Dogman in the snowstorm up in the Grand Teton Mountains. Those 5 right there, if I had to pick 5 that I think are the creepiest, those would probably be the 5 creepiest ones that come to mind right now.
I have always wanted to know this myself, Vic. When did you discover Dogman, and what was your reaction?
Well, like I said in the brief bio I gave at the start of the show, I used to co-host a Bigfoot-specific talk radio show in 2007 and 2008. Well, that's where and how I met Bear, Coonbo, and Matt Knapp. Well, as you know, those guys, well before then, they were beating the bushes, looking for boogers, as they call them. Well, after I'd been co-hosting that show for a while, they started talking about these dog-faced boogers that they had run into from time to time. Well, when I heard that term dog-faced booger, I thought, what are you talking about here? As I dug into it more and they were sharing more and more things about them with me, I was just hooked. Everything that drew me to the Sasquatch phenomenon, it was multiplied by a factor of 10 with these dog-faced boogers or dogmen. So for me, it made Sasquatch not seem all that creepy anymore. I found something else that I was much more interested in than Sasquatch all of a sudden, and that's how this all got started. It wasn't long after that I noticed that people who unfortunately encountered these dogman things, I noticed that they just weren't being represented properly in my mind. So I thought, you know what, it'd be really nice to be able to represent them some way, to give them some kind of a public venue where they could come forward and share their stories and have someone who's easily found, someone they could talk to about their experiences and hopefully learn some things about these dogmen that terrified them so badly. That's why I created this whole Dogman Encounters thing. That's the genesis of the show, and that's how all this got started.
Well, we definitely appreciate the fact that you brought this subject to light and that you are doing your show, and I hope and pray personally that you will do it for as long as you can do it, because I believe that you truly do help so many people. And congratulations, by the way, on just having your 100th show. That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, congratulations. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, when I started this on August 22nd of 2015, I had no idea that this would grow the way it has. It blows me away to think that that's the case. When I look at all the things that have happened since I started the show with that first episode, it just blows me away. For example, a really talented illustrator and a great guy too, by the way, named Chris Chin, he created a new illustration for me that I'm going to reveal on the 100th episode of the show. I can't thank Chris enough for all the great work he's done and all the hard work he's put in to help me get this whole Dogman Encounters thing represented the way I wanted to represent it. The work he has also done for Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio is so impressive.
Well,
but
now
thank you for the good words.
Oh, you are more than welcome. Now I am super excited. By the time the listeners hear this, it will already be unveiled. So now I'm really, really excited about your 100th episode. I can't wait. The other thing I wanted to ask you real quick, Vic, was some people believe that you are the leading authority on dogmen. What would you like to say to that?
Well, I appreciate the good words from anyone who says that, but I'm so far from being an expert. All I do is just try to help these people who have encounters with dogmen as much as I can, which in almost every case it's not nearly enough in my opinion, but I just focus on trying to help these eyewitnesses as much as I can, and I don't worry about whether I'm the foremost authority on dogmen or not. I didn't start this to be some kind of an expert on dogmen. The show, Dogman Encounters, it's not about dogmen, it's about the people who encounter dogmen. So please do keep that in mind. I happen to learn things about dogmen because of the fact that I talk with these people who encounter them.
I think you should be commended because you offer people a platform to really talk about some of these experiences that in some cases some of these people have probably been holding in for over 20 years. And it's a really good thing that they can actually go onto your show and actually talk about it. And I think every one of your guests should be commended, including you, Danielle, for coming forward. And because it takes a brave soul to come forward and talk about this sort of thing. And if anything, it encourages people to come out and talk about their experiences as well. And so at the end of the day, it's a very positive thing.
Well, thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't thank Danielle. I can't thank all of the eyewitnesses enough for coming forward and doing that. It's so good. It's such a good thing, in my opinion, for them to finally be able to do that. Like I talked about earlier, if you have a Sasquatch encounter, it's easy to find a venue where you can go and talk about what happened to you. But for these dogman eyewitnesses, I'm just so glad that they have a place where they can do that. They can go and talk about their feelings, what happened. And now that Danielle's show, now that Amanda has her show out too, it's great to see that options are popping up where people who have these encounters, they can go to do that.
Well, I have said it publicly several times. I wouldn't even be doing this if it wasn't for you, because everybody knows I've come out and said you're my mentor, and I hope one day that I will be able to make you proud, but you set the bar so high that I don't know if I will ever be able to reach it.
Oh, thanks for the good words, but you don't set your goals very high.
Oh, that is not true.
Danielle was actually born for this, actually, in my opinion. I mean, she has the sweetest voice. She's so easy to talk to.
Oh, gosh. Now y'all are making me blush. I don't think so. I actually hate my voice when I hear it. I just wanted to do this to help people because Vic helped me, and I just want to help people like he helped me.
You do have a great voice, and like I've told you before, you are a natural at this. You're not giving yourself enough credit. Once you have a chance to see how your show takes off, you'll see what I mean.
Well, I hope you're right, but we will see. The last question, because we've had you now for about a little over an hour, Vic. The last question I would like to ask you, well, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. Is there any last questions you would like to ask before we go, Q?
That would be everything, you know, and I know for me personally, and not having an encounter like that, I will say this. Your show, Vic, is the only one that I can listen to at night and remember later on that I forgot to take the trash out. And, well, I tell myself, well, I guess I'll have to wait for next week for the trash guy to come by because I'm not going out in the dark. I don't even live by the woods.
Yeah, the show does tend to have that kind of an effect on people. When it's time to take the trash out after dark, you kind of pay the price.
Yeah, really.
For all the listeners out there, make sure you take the trash out and do what you have to do before the show comes on, before the night sets in.
Yes, definitely check the doors and windows. Definitely. Well, the last question I'm going to ask for the night, because we've had a good time, and I'm so glad that you joined us, Vic. But the last question is, Vic, have you ever had a Dogman or a Sasquatch encounter?
Well, I've never had a Dogman encounter. I'm asked that a lot, but no, I've never had an encounter with a Dogman, thank goodness. I think I did have an encounter with a Sasquatch, but I didn't see it, so I don't know for sure that that's what I encountered that day. To set this experience up, I'm just going to tell you that about 35 years ago or so, there was a neighbor I had who did a lot of hunting. Back then, he was already in his 70s, and he had spent his whole life hunting in some really interesting places, doing all kinds of things outdoors. Consequently, he had all kinds of interesting stories to share with someone like me who couldn't get enough of the stuff. In fact, one time, as I was sitting on his couch, he told me about this bear that had attacked him. When he told me that, he had never given me any reason to doubt that he was telling me the truth about any of these things he was sharing with me, but when he told me that, I thought, oh, come on. And right about that time, he pulled his pant leg up and showed me his calf. I took a close look, and I could see the holes in his calf, the wounds that were still there that looked to me like they had to have been made by the jaws of a bear. He talked about this black bear that had attacked him in upstate Michigan, in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. That's what that story was all about. But nonetheless, he told me that the next deer season, when it came in, he told me that he was going to take me to his farm way out in the middle of nowhere to go deer hunting with him because he knew I'd never been before. Well, before you knew it, it was time for opening day to come in. Well, our plan was that the day before season came in, he would drive us to his farm, we'd get all set up, and then before dawn, we would set out across the woods about a mile and a half away from the farmhouse to this hollow that he said the hollow would be a great spot for me to stake out for the day. He told me that he would drop me off at this spot he had already picked out for me. He would continue on a couple of ridges over where he would stake out that spot until, I guess, around 4 o'clock or so. He would come in. He'd pick me up on the way into the farmhouse. Well, fast forward to deer season. The day before it came, he drove us to his farm. That night, we settled in. Before you knew it, it was not long before dawn. We were walking out to my spot where he was going to drop me off. We got to this spot where he had picked for me. He told me all the rules about staying quiet, no fast movements, and so on and so forth. Well, before I knew it, he was heading over to his spot, a couple of ridges over. I sat there all morning and all early afternoon. Well, what you need to understand is on his farm he had this really mean horse named Red that he kept warning me about. He told me to stay away from Red. He knew I loved horses. Well, while I was sitting there with my back up against this white oak, I can't remember what time in the early afternoon it was, but all of a sudden I hear this really loud horse whinny coming from about 30 feet behind me. Well, the problem with that was this slope. I was in a huge hollow, and this slope that I was sitting on with my back up against that tree, that slope was way too steep for any horse to be on. The second problem with that was there was all this leaf litter all over the slope. Everyone knows that horses are not stealthy creatures. For Red to get that close behind me on this massive slope, I would have heard him coming a long way off with all those leaves on that slope. So it couldn't have been a horse. It couldn't have been Red. But what was it that made that really loud horse whinny? So looking back on that over the years, as I learned more and more about Sasquatch, I became more and more convinced that that had to be what did that, what made that sound. Again, I didn't see it, so I don't know for sure that that's what it was, but if it wasn't a Sasquatch that made that horse whinny from about 30 feet behind me on that steep slope, what was it? That's about my only experience that's the only experience I've had that I could point to and say a cryptid might have been involved, or probably was involved.
Wow, well, thank you. Wow, that's kind of creepy. But that's a very interesting story. Thank you, Vic, for sharing that. Well, y'all, it has been quite the adventure tonight listening to all of this. And in closing, Q, is there anything you would like to say?
Yes, Danielle, thank you so very much for letting me co-host.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I hope you will come back.
Most definitely, anytime.
And Vic, is there any closing words you would like to tell people?
Well, yeah, first of all, I can't say it enough. I wish nothing but the best for your show. With your God-given talents, I think you're going to do so well, so much better at this than you have any clue about. I wish you nothing but the best. I'm so excited to see you starting your show. Thank you so much for having me on. You two have such a great chemistry. I know it's a guaranteed thing that the show's going to do really well, and like I said, I wish you the best.
Well, thank you so much, Vic. Well, it's that time, everyone, and Vic, I want to thank you again for coming on Dogman Diaries and for telling us all these things and sharing all this information, and hopefully I will be able to retain some of it so I can help my guests. And again, Q, thank you so much for joining us too. I know that I and all the listeners really appreciate it. I hope you will both come back sometime, Q, to co-host, and hopefully Vic, maybe you can come back and tell us some things going on with Sasquatch. You could be on one of my Sasquatch episodes. That would be really great. Again, great. Again, I would really like to just say thank you both for being here, and I also want to say thank you to all the listeners out there who have been here every night to listen. I want to remind everybody to please subscribe, because if you haven't subscribed, then you've missed this special. Vic was one of the specials, and if you don't subscribe, you won't know when I have something pop up. So please, subscribe. I want to also let everybody know that I really appreciate all of their support, the support you give me, and the support that you give all of my guests. But, as always, if you have a Dogman story or a Sasquatch story, then please contact me, Danielle Steadman. You can do so through email at dogmandiaries@gmail.com or on Facebook at Dogman Diaries. You can also tweet Dogman Diaries now. And remember that here at Dogman Diaries, we will never judge you or your story. I'm a believer because I'm also a survivor too. And remember, if you're like me and people inquire about why you're so afraid of the dark, simply reply, I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of what could be lurking in the dark. Have a great week, friends, and until next time, be safe and be blessed. My thoughts and prayers are with you all. Good night.